Chapter 27 of the Book of Snobs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie van Mallegem. The Book of Snobs by William Makepeace Thackeray. Chapter 27. A Visit to some Country Snobs. We had the fish, which, as the kind reader may remember, I had brought down in a delicate attention to Mrs. Sponto, to variegate the repast of next day, and cod and oyster sauce, twice laid salt cod, and scalloped oysters, formed part of the bill of fare, until I began to fancy that the Sponto family, like our late revered monarch George II, had a fancy for stale fish, and about this time, the pig being consumed, we began upon a sheep. But how shall I forget the solemn splendour of a second course, which was served up in great state by Stripes in a silver dish and cover, a napkin round his dirty thumbs, and consisted of a landrail, not much bigger than a corpulent sparrow. "My love, will you take any game?" says Sponto, with prodigious gravity, and stuck his fork into the little mouthful of an island in the silver sea. Stripes, too, at intervals, dribbled out the marsala with a solemnity which would have done honour to a duke's butler. The Barmecide's dinner to Schacabac was only 1 degree removed from these solemn banquets. As there were plenty of pretty country places close by, a comfortable country town, with good houses of gentlefolks, a beautiful old parsonage, close to the church whither we went, and where the Carabas family have their ancestral calves and monumented Gothic pew, and every appearance of good society in the neighbourhood, I rather wondered we were not enlivened by the appearance of some of the neighbours at Evergreens, and asked about them. "We can't, in our position of life, we can't well associate with the attorney's family, as I leave you to suppose," says Mrs. Sponto confidentially. "Of course not," I answered, though I didn't know why. "And the doctor?" said I. "A most excellent worthy creature," says Mrs. P. "Saved Maria's life. Really a learned man. But what can one do in one's position? One may ask one's medical man to one's table, certainly. But his family, my dear Mrs. Snob." "Half a dozen little gallipots," interposed Miss Ward, the governess. And the young ladies laughed in chorus. "We only live with the county families," Miss Ward continued, tossing up her head. Author's note. I have since heard that this aristocratic lady's father was a livery button-maker in St. Martin's Lane, where he met with misfortunes, and his daughter acquired her taste for heraldry. But it may be told to her credit that out of her earnings she has kept the bed-ridden old bankrupt in great comfort and secrecy in Pentonville, and furnished her brother's outfit for the cadetship which her patron, Lord Swigglebiggle, gave her when he was at the Board of Control. I have this information from a friend. To hear Miss Ward herself, you would fancy that her papa was a Rothschild, and that the markets of Europe were convulsed when he went into the Gazette. End of Auster's note. The Duke is abroad. We are at feud with the Carabases. The Ringwood don't come down till Christmas. In fact, nobody's here till the hunting season. Positively nobody. Whose is the large red house just outside of the town? What? The Chateau Gallico? That purse-browed ex-linen draper, Mr. Yardley, with the yellow liveries and the wife in red velvet? How can you, my dear Mrs. Snob, be so satirical? The impertinence of those people is really something quite overwhelming. Well, then, there is the parson, Dr. Chrysostom. He's a gentleman, at any rate. At this Mrs. Sponto looked at Miss Ward. After their eyes had met, and they had wagged their heads at each other, they looked up to the ceiling. So did the young ladies. They thrilled. It was evident I had said something very terrible. "Another black sheep in the church?" thought I, with a little sorrow, for I don't care to own that I have a respect for the cloth. I hope there's nothing wrong?" "Wrong?" says Mrs. P., clasping her hands with a tragic air. "Oh!" says Miss Word, and the two girls gasping in chorus. Well, says I'm very sorry for it. I never saw a nicer-looking old gentleman, or a better school, or heard a better sermon. He used to preach those sermons in a surplice, hissed out Mrs. Ponto. He's beauty-eyed, Mr. Snob. Heavenly powers, says I, admiring the pure art of these female theologians, and strive scheme and wizardry. It's so weak that no wonder Ponto's sleep isn't disturbed by it. Of mornings we used to go out shooting. We had Ponto's own fields to sport over, where we got the landrail, and the non-preserved part of the Harbach property, and one evening in a stubble of Ponto's skirting the Caribous woods, we got among some pheasants, and had some real sport. I shot a hen, I know greatly to my delight. "Back it," says Ponto in rather a hurried manner, "and here's somebody coming." So I pocketed the bird. "You infernal poaching thieves!" roars out a man from the hedge in the garb of a gamekeeper. "I wish I could catch you on this side of the hedge. I'd put a brace of barrels into you, that I would." "Curse that snapper," says Ponto, moving off. "He's always watching me like a spy." "Carry off the birds, you sneaks, and sell 'em in London," roars the individual, who it appears was a keeper of Lord Caribous. "You'll get 6 shillings a brace for 'em." "You know the price of 'em well enough, and so does your master too, you scoundrel," says Ponto, still retreating. "We kill 'em on our ground," cries Mr. Snapper. "We don't set traps for other people's bird. We're no decoy ducks. We're no sneaking poachers. We don't shoot hens, like that 'ere cockney who's got the tail of one a-sticking out of his pocket. Only just come across the hedge, that's all." "I tell you what," says Stripes, who was out with us as keeper this day. In fact, he's keeper, coachman, gardener, valet, and bailiff, with Thomas under him. "If you'll come across John Snapper and take your coat off, I'll give you such a whooping as you've never had since the last time I did it at Wattlebury Fair." "Whoop on your own weight," Mr. Snapper said, whistling his dogs and disappearing into the wood. And so we came out of this controversy rather victoriously. But I began to alter my preconceived ideas of rural felicity. End of Chapter 27.